the human relic hunter. Chapter 3. Threads of the Past. The Wanderer drifted silently through the void, its engines humming softly as the aftermath of their harrowing escape settled over the cabin. Durin slumped in the captain's chair, his claws idly tapping the armrest as he stared out into the stars. His antennae twitched faintly, betraying the tension he tried to hide behind a facade of calm. "Captain?" Bolt's voice broke the quiet, hesitant and tinged with unease. "Playback. Authorized?" Durin groaned, tipping his head back. "Bolt, if you're talking about those creepy warnings, I think I've had enough of doom and gloom for one day." "Playback," Bolt chirped, ignoring him. "Initiated." A distorted voice crackled through the comms, its tone mechanical and foreboding. "Guardians remain. Proceed with caution." Durin rolled his eyes, sitting up in his chair. "See? We've heard it a dozen times already. And guess what? We're still here. No Guardians came knocking, no death traps followed us into hyperspace. We're fine." Seraph's voice cut through the cabin, dry as ever. "A rather bold conclusion given the circumstances. You did, after all, trigger an ancient Terran defense system and narrowly escape obliteration. Hardly what I'd call fine." Durin gestured broadly at the empty space outside the viewport. "Yeah, well, do you see any Guardians out there? No? Then I'm calling this a win." Bolt, perched on his mismatched wheels near the console, let out a nervous whir. "Guardians. Undefined. Possibilities. Extensive." Durin leaned forward, resting his chin on one hand. "Okay, Seraph, enlighten us. What do you think these Guardians are? Robots? Killer drones? Giant space bears?" "Given the Terran penchant for over-engineering, all of the above is plausible," Seraph replied. "However, the term Guardians implies entities designed to protect something of significant value. They could be advanced automated systems, sentient constructs with directives to enforce, or even bioengineered beings left behind by humanity." "Sounds like a whole lot of bad news," Durin muttered, crossing his arms. "Not necessarily," Seraph countered. "If these Guardians exist, they may only be hostile if we're deemed a threat." "Of course," the AI added with a touch of irony, "your usual approach to relic hunting doesn't lend itself to subtlety." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Durin shot back, though his antennae twitched with unease. "I'll make sure to put Don't Anger the Guardians at the top of my to-do list." Bolt tilted his dome, his optics flickering. "Guardians? Dangerous? Recommendation, proceed cautiously." Durin smirked, the tension easing slightly as he tapped Bolt's dome. "Thanks, Bolt. That's advice I'll definitely follow, right after I stop running headfirst into trouble." The drone chirped in agreement, seemingly missing the sarcasm, and rolled back to inspect the scattered tools on the floor. Durin sighed, leaning back in his chair again. "So," he said after a moment of silence, "what's the worst-case scenario, Seraph? Let's say these Guardians do exist. What are we up against?" Seraph's holographic form flickered to life above the console, its sleek, abstract design glowing faintly. "Worst-case scenario? A self-repairing network of Terran war machines designed to eradicate perceived threats with extreme efficiency." "Comforting," Durin muttered, scratching the back of his neck, "really putting my mind at ease here." The AI's voice took on a sharp edge. "You asked for the worst case. Optimistically, they could be benign or even dormant, provided we don't activate them." "Well, here's hoping they're taking a long nap," Durin said, standing and stretching. His claws clattered lightly against the console as he glanced at Bolt. "You hear that, buddy? No waking up ancient death machines. That's your new mission." "Mission accepted," Bolt chirped earnestly, oblivious to the humor in Durin's tone. The tension in the cabin lifted slightly, but Durin couldn't shake the lingering unease. The Oracle's warnings echoed in his mind, threading a faint but persistent thread of doubt through his bravado. "Well," he said, breaking the silence, "we've survived so far. No sense in worrying about what's waiting until it's staring us in the face, right?" "An interesting philosophy," Seraph remarked dryly. "Let's hope it serves you well." Durin offered a lopsided grin, but as the quiet of the void closed in again, he found himself staring out the viewport, his thoughts lingering on the unknown dangers ahead. As Durin finally pushed away from the viewport, he needed to keep his mind busy, and nothing did that better than poking around the ship's systems, or, as he preferred to call it, ensuring things didn't explode. Bolt rolled into the cabin, his mismatched wheels squeaking faintly against the deck. The drone chirped cheerfully, his optics bright and focused. "New captain! Repairs! Complete! Functionality enhanced!" Durin arched a brow and tilted his head at Seraph's holographic form. "Care to translate the enthusiasm?" Seraph's voice was clipped as always. "During the post-escape repairs, I reactivated several dormant subroutines in Bolt's programming. These included his ability to read and interpret Terran glyphs, which had been non-functional due to extensive system degradation." Durin blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "Wait, Bolt can read Terran glyphs now? Like, fluently?" "Within reason," Seraph replied, "though I wouldn't expect nuanced literary analysis." Bolt chirped in, his dome tilting excitedly. "Glyphs? Accessible? Practice? Possible?" Durin leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Huh. Well, look at you, Bolt, our own little translator. Can you actually use it, or are we about to have a lot of entertaining misunderstandings?" "Demonstration available!" Bolt exclaimed, rolling eagerly to a nearby console where Durin had left a datapad displaying an image of a Terran artifact. The drone's optics scanned the glyphs, humming faintly as he processed the symbols. "Translation," Bolt announced proudly. "Caution. Contents under pressure." Durin barked a laugh, slapping his knee. "That's not exactly a Terran proverb, but I'll give you points for accuracy." "An underwhelming debut," Seraph remarked dryly. "Still, it's better than the alternative." Bolt beeped indignantly, his optics glowing faintly. "More practice. Required. New captain? Approve?" Durin smirked and gave the drone a mock salute. "You're approved, buddy. Just don't get cocky." The cabin settled into a quiet rhythm again, until Durin's claws tapped against the edge of his chair. "Speaking of Terran mysteries," he began, glancing toward Seraph, "what's the word on that data core we yanked off the Eternal Resolve? You were working your AI magic on it, weren't you?" Seraph's holographic form flickered slightly, as if in irritation. "The data core is encrypted with multiple layers of advanced Terran ciphers. Progress has been sluggish. The more I decode, the more complex the layers become." "Sluggish, huh?" Durin teased, leaning forward. "That's not the glowing endorsement I'd expect from the galaxy's most advanced AI." "I am not a miracle worker," Seraph replied coolly. "The encryption appears designed to evolve dynamically, adapting to intrusion attempts. However, I am making incremental progress." "Captain!" Bolt piped up, his dome swiveling toward Durin. "Assistance available. Upgrades. Enable glyph recognition. Volunteer. Initiated." Durin grinned. "You hear that, Seraph? Bolt's ready to save the day. Should we let him take a crack at it?" Seraph let out what could only be described as a digital sigh. "If nothing else, his efforts may provide entertainment." "All right, Bolt," Durin said, gesturing dramatically to the console. "Show us what you've got." The drone rolled forward, his wheels squeaking faintly as he approached the data core's interface. With a whir of activity, Bolt's system synced to the console. His optics flickered as he scanned the encryption layers. After a tense moment, Bolt chirped triumphantly. "Pattern. Identified. Repetition detected within secondary layer." Durin's antennae twitched in surprise. "Well, I'll be damned. He actually found something." Seraph's tone carried a note of reluctant approval. "It appears Bolt's enhancements may indeed be useful. He's detected a recurring sequence that could expedite decryption." Bolt turned his dome toward Durin, his optics glowing with pride. "Contribution. Successful. New captain. Pleased?" Durin grinned. "Pleased? I'm downright impressed, Bolt. Keep this up, and you'll be running the whole ship." "Over my simulated body," Seraph interjected. Laughter filled the cabin as Durin leaned back, watching Bolt work with a renewed sense of optimism. For the first time since leaving the Eternal Resolve, the encrypted data core felt less like a mystery and more like an opportunity. Bolt rolled into the main cabin, his wheels squeaking softly as his dome tilted toward Durin, who lounged on a worn chair, flipping through navigation logs on a console. "New captain," Bolt chirped brightly, his optics glowing. "Request? Permission? Granted? Durin arched a brow, looking up from his console. Depends on what you're asking, Bolt. You're not going to play another recording of ominous warnings, are you? No, Bolt beeped insistently. Glyphs. Practice required. Terran relics. Inspection requested. Durin blinked, then let out a laugh. You want to see the collection, huh? All right, why not? Prepare to feast your optics on the finest treasures the galaxy has ever seen. As Durin pushed himself up, Seraph's voice filtered in through the speakers, already tinged with sarcasm. Treasures, is it? Are you certain you don't mean scraps of dubious origin acquired at exorbitant prices? Quiet, Seraph, Durin shot back, brushing his claws off dramatically. You wouldn't know a priceless artifact if it hit you in the circuits. Durin led Bolt to a small storage compartment nestled against the cabin wall. With a flourish, he pulled open the hatch, revealing a modest array of objects carefully secured in foam cutouts. Behold, he declared, the legacy of humanity preserved by yours truly. Bolt rolled closer, his optics scanning the collection with keen interest. Relics. Fascinating. Analysis. Initiated. Durin carefully picked up the first item, a shiny aluminum can, its surface adorned with faded red and white branding. This, he said with reverence, is an ancient Terran drinking vessel. It's called a Coca-Cola can. Very rare, probably ceremonial. Seraph's voice cut through, dripping with disdain. Ceremonial? Durin, it's a mass-produced beverage container. Its only value is the sugar water it once held. Durin waved a dismissive claw. Nonsense! Do you know how many credits I paid for this? It's pristine, Bolt chirped in wonder. Cautionary glyphs. Detected. Best before. Intriguing. Ancient warnings? Durin grinned. See, even Bolt gets it. Seraph let out a digital sigh. I rest my case. Setting the can down, Durin reached for the next item, a small rectangular object with a cracked screen and a faded metallic band. Now this, he said, holding it up, is a timekeeping device, a Casio chrono tracker, powered by starlight. Solar panels, Seraph corrected. It's a solar-powered watch, and broken, if I'm not mistaken. Details, Durin said, glaring at the holographic projection. It's vintage, the kind of thing Terran leaders probably used to synchronize their war efforts. Bolt beeped with delight, his dome tilting closer to inspect the watch. Glyphs, compact, purpose, clear, time preservation, essential to Terrans. Exactly, Durin said triumphantly, ignoring Seraph's grumbles about overactive imaginations. Finally, Durin reached for the centerpiece of his collection, a keyring with a miniature Earth globe dangling from it. The small sphere was chipped and scratched, but still spun faintly on its axis. This, Durin said solemnly, is a ceremonial artifact of Terran rulers. Look at the craftsmanship, a perfect representation of their homeworld, symbolizing unity or power or something. Seraph's tone was drier than a desert. A tourist trinket, most likely purchased in bulk by Terrans on their vacations. Bolt's optics glowed brighter as he examined the keyring. Planetary glyphs, identified, Terrans, world builders. Durin smirked. That's right, Bolt. They were masters of their domain, and now I own a piece of that history. Seraph couldn't hold back. You overpaid for it at a flea market, Durin. The vendor even called it a souvenir. Durin crossed his arms, glaring at the holographic projection. You're just jealous of my impeccable taste. These relics are priceless. Priceless junk, Seraph retorted, eliciting a chirping laugh from Bolt, who seemed more amused by the banter than the objects themselves. Bolt finally tilted his dome up at Durin, his tone sincere. Relics. Inspiring. Thank you, new captain. Historical preservation. Appreciated. Durin grinned, ruffling Bolt's dome affectionately. See, Seraph? At least Bolt has some appreciation for Terran culture. You could learn a thing or two. Doubtful, Seraph replied, but there was no real bite in his tone. The room settled into a companionable quiet as Durin carefully replaced the relics, a satisfied grin lingering on his face. For all the sarcasm and skepticism, this little collection represented something more than credits or status. It was a connection to the past, a glimpse into a long-lost world. and as Bolt chirped contentedly beside him, Durin couldn't help but feel like he'd done something right. The central console of the Wanderer hummed faintly as a holographic projection of the Oracle's star map flickered to life. Durin tapped his claws against the edge of the console, leaning forward to examine the glowing markers. Seraph's voice, calm and measured, broke the silence. Before you leap to conclusions about where to go next, might I suggest we approach this logically? Each marker represents a potential artifact, but also a potential death trap. A methodical analysis of the data is essential. Durin smirked, his antennae twitching. Sure, Seraph. Let's analyze the data while you remind me for the 100th time how dangerous this all is. Merely trying to prevent your tendency toward reckless decisions, Seraph replied dryly. Bolt chirped, wheeling closer to the console. Analysis? Acceptable? Glyphs? Decipherable? Contribution? Possible? Durin gestured dramatically to the holographic map. All right, Bolt. Let's hear what those shiny new translation skills of yours can do. Just don't spook us too much with your findings. Risk is just part of the game, Durin replied, leaning forward to examine the map. Let's see what we're dealing with. The holographic markers pulsed faintly, each one accompanied by fragmented glyphs that hovered around it like orbiting satellites. Bolt's optics flickered as he processed the symbols, emitting a low hum. First system, Bolt began, highlighting a point on the map near a dense cluster of stars. Translation: the final bastion. Warning: significant. Glyphs suggest protection, defense, final stand. Durin tilted his head, his antennae twitching. Final stand. That doesn't sound like a cozy vacation spot. It's likely a military installation, Seraph interjected. A stronghold established during the final days of humanity's presence in the galaxy. It could contain advanced technology, or remnants of their conflicts. And a whole lot of things that want to kill us, Durin muttered. All right, let's table that one for now. What's next? Bolt chirped and highlighted another system, this one near the fringes of known space. Translation: the Vault of Scale and Mystery. Location: jungle-covered. Description: immense size. Function: unknown. Durin's eyes lit up. Immense size, huh? That sounds like my kind of treasure hunt. I would strongly advise against it, Seraph said, his tone flat. A jungle environment presents significant challenges: low visibility, dangerous wildlife, and interference that would render scans unreliable. You'll be walking in blind. Durin smirked, leaning back in his chair. Walking in blind is what I do best. Besides, scale and mystery? That's practically begging me to check it out. Bolt chirped again, his dome tilting slightly. Glyphs suggest caution. Phrase: within lies the Watcher dormant. Watcher, huh? Durin repeated, his grin widening. Now that sounds promising. You have a unique interpretation of warnings, Seraph quipped, though I suspect it won't change your decision. Not even a little, Durin replied, gesturing to the highlighted system. We're going to the jungle planet. If there's a treasure trove buried under all that greenery, it's worth the gamble. Seraph sighed audibly. Very well. I'll prepare the navigational data and attempt to compensate for the interference. Don't say I didn't warn you. Noted, Durin said, tapping the console to confirm their next destination. All right, Bolt. You ready to put those shiny new translation skills to work? Excitement. Elevated, Bolt chirped. Translation capacity. Prepared. Durin stood, stretching as the holographic map collapsed into a stream of coordinates. The cabin lights returned to normal, casting the space in warm, ambient tones. We've got our heading, he said, his antennae twitching with excitement. A jungle planet filled with scale, mystery, and who knows what else. This is what relic hunting is all about. It's also what gets relic hunters killed, Seraph replied dryly. Details, Durin said with a dismissive wave. As Bolt trundled away to check the ship's systems, Durin leaned back against the console, a grin playing at the corners of his mouth. The promise of adventure, danger, and discovery sent a thrill through him. The jungle planet was waiting, and he couldn't resist the call of the unknown. Get ready, team, he said to no one in particular. We're just getting started. The Wanderer hummed steadily, its engines thrumming through the hull as it drifted through the vast emptiness of hyperspace. Inside, the cabin was quiet, a calm lull after the chaos of their recent adventures. Durin reclined in his chair near the central console, staring absent-mindedly at the swirling colors of hyperspace visible through the viewport. Bolt trundled into the room, his wheels squeaking faintly. His dome swiveled toward Durin, optics glowing with an innocent eagerness. "New captain! Request assistance. Glyph translation. Practice ongoing." Durin grinned, shaking his head. "You're relentless, Bolt. All right, let's see what you've got this time." Bolt carefully wheeled over to the console where Durin had placed the relics earlier. His optics focused intently on the Coca-Cola can, and he began chirping softly as he processed the faded glyphs on its surface. Translation initiated. Text reads, "Enjoy. The stars. Refreshment. Optimal for cosmic travel." Durin laughed, leaning forward to pick up the can. "Well, you're not far off, little guy. Shame they didn't include instructions for avoiding interstellar death traps." "Refreshment? Culturally significant?" Bolt asked, his dome tilting. "Very," Durin said with mock seriousness, setting the can back down. Terrans apparently loved their drinks. Makes sense. They were good at coming up with ways to enjoy life. "They were also good at creating ways to end it," Seraph interjected, his voice dry and sardonic. "A duality that makes them endlessly fascinating and dangerous." Durin chuckled. "You always know how to bring down the mood, Seraph." "Merely offering balance," the AI replied. As Bolt moved on to the Casio chrono tracker, Durin's gaze wandered back to the viewport, his expression growing distant. The familiar rhythm of the ship lulled him into thought, memories surfacing unbidden. He leaned back, folding his arms as his antennae twitched slightly. "You ever wonder what it's like to have roots, Bolt?" The drone paused mid-scan, his optics swiveling toward Durin. "Roots, biological or metaphorical?" "Metaphorical," Durin said, his tone quieter now. "To belong somewhere, to a place that feels like home." Bolt chirped softly. "New captain? No home?" "Had one," Durin muttered. "Didn't stick around." Seraph, ever attuned to the nuances of the crew's conversations, chimed in. "Are we indulging in self-reflection, Durin? How uncharacteristic of you." Durin snorted, rubbing the back of his neck. "Don't get used to it, Seraph. But yeah, I guess I'm feeling nostalgic." He glanced at Bolt, who had paused his glyph practice to listen intently. "I grew up on a mining colony, middle of nowhere, just a rock in space with a bunch of tunnels and people who worked until they dropped." "Mining," Bolt chirped. "Significant contribution to galactic infrastructure?" Durin laughed, though there was little humor in it. "Yeah, significant. At least to the people who owned the colony. The rest of us? We were just cogs in the machine. No way out, no future. Just work, eat, sleep, repeat." "And yet you escaped," Seraph said. "I assume you have a suitably dramatic story to share about that." "Not really," Durin replied with a shrug. "One day, a relic hunter passed through, some smooth-talking idiot looking for a guide into the old tunnels. I figured I'd tag along. He'd pay me a few credits and it beat hauling ore for another day." "And then?" Bolt asked, his dome tilting eagerly. "And then he died," Durin said bluntly. "Activated something he shouldn't have. Didn't even make it back to his ship." Bolt beeped in alarm. "Risk, substantial." "Welcome to the life of a relic hunter," Durin said with a wry grin. "But he had enough gear and credits to get me off that rock, so I took his ship, figured out the basics, and never looked back." "Charming," Seraph said. "A tale of opportunity and questionable ethics." Durin shrugged. "Call it what you want. That life wasn't for me, and relic hunting? It's dangerous, sure, but it's freedom. I'll take freedom over safety any day." The room fell quiet for a moment as Bolt processed the story. Finally, the drone chirped. "New captain, made correct choice, freedom, optimal for exploration." Durin chuckled, ruffling Bolt's dome. "Glad you think so, buddy." Seraph, ever the pragmatist, added, "Let's hope your penchant for freedom doesn't end with us all vaporized. Shall we return to the task at hand?" Durin grinned. Yeah. Back to the glyphs, Bolt. Let's see what other mysteries you can crack. As the Wanderer sailed through hyperspace, the crew returned to their rhythm, Bolt deciphering relics with innocent enthusiasm, Durin bantering with Seraph, and the ever-present hum of adventure pulling them forward into the unknown. The Wanderer emerged from hyperspace with a faint shudder, the swirling lights of the void giving way to the vast blackness of normal space. Immediately, the view ahead was dominated by the vibrant colors of a massive, storm-racked planet. Green swirls of dense jungle were barely visible beneath heavy cloud cover, while flashes of lightning illuminated the tumultuous atmosphere. "Welcome to our jungle paradise," Durin said with a grin, his antennae twitching as he leaned forward in his chair. "Looks cozy." "Your definition of cozy leaves much to be desired," Seraph replied, his tone dry. "Scans are encountering significant interference. Atmospheric density and electrical storms are limiting sensor resolution." "Translation," Durin muttered, tapping a claw against the console. "We're flying blind." "Not entirely," Seraph corrected. "The interference is impeding electronic scans, but the ship's optical sensors remain functional. I suggest relying on visual identification for any significant features." Bolt chirped eagerly, his optics glowing brighter as he rolled closer to the console. "Visual detection, engaged, observation, commencing." The Wanderer drifted closer to the planet, its engines humming softly as Durin guided the ship into orbit. The cabin was filled with the low buzz of static as the ship's sensors struggled against the planet's turbulent atmosphere. Lightning lit up the swirling clouds, and for brief moments the surface below was visible, an endless expanse of green, broken by rivers snaking like silver veins through the dense jungle. "Pretty wild down there," Durin muttered, his claws dancing over the controls to stabilize their orbit. "What do you think, Seraph? Worth the risk?" "Unknown," the AI replied. "However, based on the limited data available, the planet's surface appears largely untouched. If the Terrans built anything here, it would likely be concealed beneath the canopy." "Lucky for us," Durin said, a mischievous gleam in his eye. "Concealed usually means valuable." "Or dangerous," Seraph countered. "You have a remarkable ability to conflate the two." Before Durin could reply, Bolt emitted a sharp beep. "Observation. Anomaly detected. Structure visible." Durin and Seraph turned their attention to the main display as Bolt enhanced the feed from the optical sensors. The image was grainy and disrupted by the planet's storms, but through a break in the canopy, a massive structure became visible. It was covered in vegetation, the jungle's relentless growth obscuring most of its features, yet its sheer size and geometric precision were unmistakable. This was no natural formation. "Whoa," Durin said, his voice tinged with awe. "That's not just a hut in the woods." "Indeed," Seraph agreed. "The scale is impressive. Preliminary analysis suggests a structure comparable in size to a planetary hangar bay. Its purpose remains unclear, though its construction implies significant Terran resources." Durin whistled, his antennae twitching. "A planetary hangar bay? That's no small feat. Whatever this thing was built for, it wasn't for something minor. You think it's a base?" "Possibly," Seraph replied. "However, the dense overgrowth and structural decay make it difficult to determine its function without further exploration." Bolt chirped excitedly. "Big structure. Big discovery. Trees. Pretty." Durin laughed, his claws tapping the console. "Glad you're enjoying the scenery, Bolt. Me? I'm thinking there's treasure down there and it's just waiting for us to find it." "Speculation," Seraph said sharply. "There's no evidence to suggest the site holds anything of value." "No evidence to suggest it doesn't either," Durin shot back, grinning. "And we won't know until we get down there." Seraph let out a synthetic sigh. "You're determined to explore, regardless of the risks." "Got it in one," Durin said, adjusting the ship's trajectory. "Prep for descent, Seraph. We're heading into the unknown." As the Wanderer dipped closer to the planet's surface, the structure flickered in and out of view, shrouded by storms and the dense canopy. The scale of it loomed large in Durin's mind, a relic of humanity, hidden and untouched for centuries. "Well, team," he said, his voice alive with anticipation. "Let's see what the jungle's been hiding." "Optimism noted," Seraph replied dryly. "I recommend tempering it with caution." "Caution's for boring people," Durin quipped, his grin widening. "We're not here to play it safe." As the Wanderer began its descent, Bolt chirped cheerfully, his optics focused on the flickering view of the massive structure below. "Adventure, optimal, mission, initiated." Durin chuckled, gripping the controls. "That's the spirit, Bolt. Let's hope it's more treasure than trouble." The ship plunged into the storm-laden atmosphere, lightning crackling around it as the jungle world pulled them closer into its mysteries. Durin tapped his claws on the console, his eyes fixed on the holographic display that flickered with interference. The storm's intensity made the terrain difficult to map, leaving their landing site largely a guess. "Well, this isn't ideal," Durin muttered. "Any chance those clouds are just for show, Seraph?" "Unlikely," the AI replied. "The storms are consistent and widespread, with electrical discharges capable of overloading the Wanderer's external systems. If you insist on landing, I recommend we proceed with extreme caution." "When have we ever done anything cautiously?" Durin quipped, grinning despite the tension. Bolt trundled up beside him, his dome swiveling to analyze the fragmented glyphs displayed on a nearby console. Translation: initiated. Phrase detected. Guarded knowledge lies beneath. Enter with reverence. Durin raised an eyebrow. "Reverence? I'm not exactly the reverent type." "Perhaps a shortcoming worth addressing," Seraph said dryly. "The glyphs suggest this site holds significant Terran importance. The warning implies advanced defenses, or traps." Durin shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "Traps just mean we're heading in the right direction. Bolt, anything else?" Bolt chirped, his optics flickering as he continued scanning. "Phrase detected. A place of final remembrance. Access. Restricted to the worthy." "Final remembrance?" Durin repeated, his antennae twitching. "Sounds like a Terran shrine, or a tomb. Either way, there's bound to be something valuable down there." "Or something deadly," Seraph countered. "Your optimism is admirable if misguided." Durin smirked. "What's life without a little danger?" As the stormy surface loomed closer, Durin adjusted the Wanderer's trajectory, focusing on a relatively flat clearing near the structure they'd spotted earlier. "All right, let's do this. Seraph, get me a landing protocol. Bolt, keep an eye on those glyphs. Maybe they'll tell us how not to get fried." The ship shuddered slightly as it began its descent, the turbulence growing with each passing second. Lightning cracked across the canopy, illuminating the dense jungle below in brief, eerie flashes. The Wanderer's alarms blared as the atmosphere grew denser, buffeting the ship from all sides. "Structural integrity, holding," Seraph reported. "But I recommend expediting the landing process before that changes." Durin gripped the controls tighter, his claws tapping rapidly. "You don't say. Bolt, status?" Bolt chirped nervously. "Storm intensity, increasing. Systems, nominal. Confidence, uncertain." "Join the club," Durin muttered. A sudden jolt rocked the ship, sending tools clattering to the floor. Sparks erupted from a nearby panel, and the lights flickered ominously. "Warning," Seraph intoned. "We've taken a direct hit from a lightning strike. Auxiliary systems are compromised. Engines, partially functional." "Partially functional?" Durin shouted, wrestling with the controls. "That's not exactly comforting." The Wanderer groaned as it dipped lower, fighting against the relentless pull of the storm. Alarms blared in every direction, and the display flickered with static. Durin's antennae twitched wildly as he forced the ship toward the clearing. "Brace yourselves!" he yelled, his voice strained. "This is going to be rough!" The Wanderer hit the ground with a bone-rattling thud, sliding several meters before coming to an abrupt stop. The engines sputtered and died, leaving the cabin bathed in eerie silence punctuated only by the faint hum of emergency lights. "Landing! Achieved!" Bolt chirped weakly, his optics flickering. "Systems damaged." Durin slumped back in his chair, letting out a long breath. "Yeah, Bolt, damaged is putting it lightly." Seraph's voice cut in, calm but pointed. "Engines offline, navigation offline, external sensors limited. It appears we're grounded indefinitely." Durin rubbed his temples, groaning. Perfect. Stranded on a death planet with who knows what waiting outside. What could go wrong? Bolt beeped brightly. Adventure! Imminent! Durin let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. Well, team, I guess this is home for a while. Let's hope the locals are friendly. As the storm raged outside, the crew began assessing the damage, unaware of the secrets and dangers that lay hidden in the jungle around them.